The most feared mafia boss in the city rejected his 500th bride on live television. That same night, a small-town waitress poured him coffee and asked nothing about his money. He stayed until closing. And the heiress he just humiliated? She was already smiling, because this was exactly what she had been waiting for. The ballroom at the Whitmore Hotel in New York City was packed with people who all wanted something from Ethan Caldwell. Cameras lined the back wall. Waiters moved through the crowd carrying trays of champagne nobody really drank. Every few minutes, someone would glance toward the tall man in the dark gray suit standing near the windows, then look away quickly when he caught them staring. Ethan was used to it. He had been the most talked-about bachelor in the city for almost 10 years, ever since he took over his family's business empire at the age of 26. People called him cold, distant. Some called him heartless. He had heard every word, and none of it bothered him anymore. What did bother him was tonight. Victoria Hayes walked toward him with the kind of confidence that came from growing up surrounded by money and being told she could have anything she wanted. Her father owned half the shipping ports on the East Coast. She was beautiful, sharp, and had been introduced to Ethan 3 times this year alone by people who thought they were doing him a favor. "Ethan," she said, smiling for the cameras that were already turning toward them. "I was hoping we could talk, privately." The room went quiet in that subtle way rooms do when everyone is pretending not to listen. Ethan looked at her for a long moment. He thought about the 499 women before her, the dinners that felt like job interviews, the conversations that always circled back to his bank account, his properties, his name. He thought about how tired he was of pretending any of it meant something. "Victoria," he said, his voice calm but loud enough for the nearest cameras to catch. "I think we both know there's nothing to talk about." There never was. Her smile faltered for just a second. "I'm not interested," he continued. "I wasn't interested last time, and I won't be interested next time either. Please stop having people set this up." He walked away before she could respond. By the time Ethan reached his car, his phone was already buzzing non-stop. Someone had filmed the whole thing. Within an hour, it was everywhere. Ethan Caldwell rejects his 500th bride. The coldest man in New York strikes again. At this rate, he'll die alone, and he seems fine with it. Ethan didn't read any of it. He told his driver to take him to the airport. He had a meeting in Boston the next morning, and honestly, he just wanted to be somewhere no one knew his face. The flight took less than an hour. By the time Ethan landed, it was almost 10 at night, and the city felt different, quieter, smaller. His driver suggested a hotel near the airport, but Ethan shook his head. "I want to eat first. Something simple." They drove along the harbor, past rows of dark warehouses and small shops that had already closed for the night. Then Ethan saw a little restaurant near the water, its windows glowing warm and yellow against the dark sky. A hand-painted sign above the door read, "Harbor Light Diner." "Here," Ethan said. "Stop here." Inside, the diner was almost empty. Just an older couple finishing their meal in one corner, and a young woman wiping down the counter, humming quietly to herself. She looked up when the door opened and gave Ethan a tired but friendly smile. "Sit anywhere you like. Kitchen's closing soon, but I can still get you something hot." Her name tag read Nora. Ethan sat at the counter, mostly because it was closest. "Whatever's easy," he said. "And coffee, please." "Coming right up." She didn't ask who he was. She didn't glance at his suit or his watch the way people usually did. She just poured the coffee, slid it toward him, and went back to wiping the counter, occasionally humming the same tune. "Long day?" she asked, not really expecting an answer. "You could say that," Ethan replied. "Yeah, me too. We had a busted fridge this morning, half our orders got messed up, and then it rained so hard the roof leaked right onto table 6. She laughed a little, shaking her head. "But hey, at least nobody got hurt, and the food's still good." Ethan found himself smiling. It was such a small thing, a stranger talking about a leaking roof, but it felt more honest than anything he'd heard all night. For the next hour, Ethan stayed at the counter, eating a plate of grilled fish and vegetables that Nora made fresh, even though the kitchen was technically closed. They talked about nothing important: the weather, her job, a funny story about a customer who once tried to pay with expired coupons from another state. It was the first real conversation Ethan had in years. Back in New York, in a quiet apartment overlooking the city lights, Victoria Hayes sat alone on her couch, watching the news coverage of her rejection play over and over on different channels. Her assistant hovered nearby, clearly nervous. "Should I say something to the press? Maybe issue a statement?" Victoria didn't answer right away. She watched the footage one more time, Ethan's calm rejection, the cameras catching every second of it, her own face frozen for just a moment before she recovered. Then, slowly, she smiled. It wasn't the kind of smile someone gives after being embarrassed. It was the kind of smile someone gives when something they've been waiting for finally begins. "No," Victoria said quietly. "Let it play out. This is exactly where I wanted things to start." Ethan didn't go back to New York the next morning. He told his assistant, Marcus, that the Boston meeting needed an extra day. Marcus didn't argue, but Ethan could tell from his tone that he was confused. Ethan never extended trips. He hated wasting time in hotels. That evening, Ethan found himself walking back toward the harbor again. The Harbor Light Diner looked exactly the same as the night before. Warm yellow light spilling onto the wet pavement, the smell of grilled food drifting out the open door. Nora was behind the counter, tying her apron, when she looked up and saw him. "You're back," she said, raising an eyebrow. "Didn't peg you as a regular." "I'm not, usually," Ethan admitted, taking the same seat at the counter. "The food was good, and the coffee." Nora laughed. "Most people just say the food." He ordered the same thing as before. While she worked, they talked again, this time about her family, the diner her grandfather had opened decades ago, and how she'd taken it over after he passed. She didn't ask about Ethan's job. She didn't seem curious about his last name. To her, he was just a tired man in a nice suit who liked grilled fish and quiet conversation. Ethan came back the next night, and the night after that. By the end of the week, it had become something of a routine. He'd land in Boston for meetings that didn't really need him there, then spend his evenings at the same counter, talking to the same woman, eating the same simple food that somehow never got boring. Back in New York, people started noticing Ethan's absences. "He spent 4 nights in Boston this week," Marcus told Ryan Walker, Ethan's operations manager, as they reviewed the schedule. "Same diner every time, same seat." Ryan frowned. "Boston? There's nothing in Boston that needs 4 nights." "I know. Is he meeting someone?" Marcus hesitated. "Sort of. There's a woman who works there, a waitress." Ryan looked up sharply. "A waitress?" "Yeah." For a long moment, Ryan didn't say anything. Then he laughed. Not unkindly, just surprised. After 500 heiresses, fashion consultants, senators' daughters, and 1 actual European princess, Ethan Caldwell is falling for a waitress at a harbor diner. Apparently. Does he know we know? No idea. But Marcus... Ryan paused. "Don't say anything to anyone yet. Let's see where this goes." Word travels fast in certain circles, especially when the person involved is someone like Ethan Caldwell. By the following week, a few names from Ethan's long list of past introductions had heard the rumor. Most of them brushed it off as nothing, a passing distraction, the kind of thing rich men sometimes did before going back to their usual lives. But a few didn't brush it off so easily. Emily Carter, who had been introduced to Ethan 2 years earlier through a mutual business contact, heard about it from a friend over coffee. "A waitress," her friend repeated, stirring her drink. "From some small diner in Boston. Can you imagine?" Emily smiled politely, but didn't say much. She had met Ethan exactly twice. Both times, the conversation had felt more like a negotiation between families than anything personal. She hadn't thought about him much since. Still, something about the story stuck with her. Not because she cared who Ethan dated, but because of how the rumor had started spreading, quickly and from very specific people. People who didn't usually pay attention to things like this unless someone pointed them in that direction. Across the city, in her apartment with the wide windows overlooking Central Park, Victoria Hayes was making phone calls. Not many, just a few. The kind of calls that didn't sound important on the surface. "Hi, it's Victoria. I just wanted to check in. It's been a while since we talked." A pause. "Oh, nothing major. Just heard a funny little story going around about Ethan. Have you heard?" She made the call sound casual, friendly even. Just two people catching up, sharing harmless gossip. But each call followed the same pattern. She'd mention the waitress. She'd ask if the person remembered certain names, people from years ago, old introductions, former matchmakers who used to set up meetings for Ethan. She'd laugh about how things never seem to change, how Ethan always ends up running from something. After each call, Victoria wrote a few words in a small notebook she kept on her desk. Names, dates, old connections. By the end of the evening, the notebook had several new entries. Her assistant knocked softly and stepped inside. "Should I prepare anything for tomorrow? Any messages to send?" Victoria closed the notebook and looked out the window at the city lights. "Not yet," she said. "Just keep listening. People love to talk when they think no one's paying attention." The assistant nodded and left. Victoria stayed by the window a little longer, thinking about the waitress in Boston, a name she didn't know yet, a face she hadn't seen. It didn't matter. What mattered was that Ethan had finally done something unpredictable. And unpredictable things, Victoria had learned a long time ago, were the easiest things to use. 3 months passed quickly. Ethan started flying to Boston so often that he eventually bought a small house near the harbor, just a short walk from the diner. He told people it was for business convenience. Nobody believed him, but nobody said it out loud either. Nora and Ethan's relationship grew the same way their friendship had. Slowly, without pressure, built on quiet evenings and easy conversation. Nora still worked at the diner most days. Ethan still wore his expensive suits, but he started rolling up his sleeves when he helped her close up at night, stacking chairs and wiping down tables like it was the most normal thing in the world. One evening, after the last customer had left, Ethan sat across from Nora at one of the small tables, 2 cups of coffee between them. "I want to ask you something," he said. Nora raised an eyebrow. "That sounds serious." "It is." Ethan reached into his jacket and placed a small box on the table. He didn't make a speech. He didn't need to. "I know this is fast. I know people will talk, but I've never felt this way before. And I don't want to wait around pretending I don't know what I want." Nora stared at the box, then at him, her eyes filling with tears. "Ethan, I run a diner. I don't know anything about your world." "I don't care about my world," he said simply. "I care about this one. The one where you hum while you wipe down counters and argue with me about which fish is fresher." Nora laughed through her tears and nodded before he even finished asking. They married 3 weeks later on a quiet stretch of coastline in Newport, Rhode Island. No reporters, no 500 guests, just a small group, Nora's aunt, a few of her closest friends from the diner, and on Ethan's side, only Marcus and Ryan. The ceremony was simple, the reception was simpler. Nora wore a dress she'd bought off the rack 2 days earlier, and Ethan didn't even wear a tie. For the first time in years, he felt like himself. But the world outside didn't stay quiet for long. Someone, no one ever figured out who, leaked photos from the ceremony. By the next morning, it was everywhere. Billionaire who rejected 500 brides marries a waitress in secret wedding. From diner counter to wedding altar, who is Nora Caldwell? Former marriage candidates react to shocking news. Business magazines ran think pieces about Ethan's unpredictable behavior. Social circles buzzed with theories, some kind, most not. A few former matchmaking consultants, the same people who had spent years arranging introductions for Ethan, gave interviews expressing their shock and concern about the sudden marriage. Nora tried not to read any of it. Ethan tried to shield her from most of it, but it was impossible to ignore completely. Reporters started showing up near the diner. A few rude comments online turned into a wave of attention neither of them had asked for. "It'll calm down," Ethan told her one night, holding her hand across the kitchen table in their new home. "These things always do." Nora nodded, though she didn't look convinced. I just don't want to be the reason something bad happens to your company, or to you. Nothing bad is going to happen, Ethan said. I promise. He believed it when he said it. 4 days later, he found out he was wrong. It started with a phone call from Ryan early in the morning. Ethan, we have a problem, Ryan said, his voice tight. The Whitmore acquisition deal, the one we've been negotiating for months, it just leaked. Our competitor has the entire proposal, numbers, terms, everything. Ethan sat up straight. That's impossible. That deal was only seen by 6 people. I know, and 4 of those 6 are sitting in this building right now, completely confused. Ethan rushed to the office that morning, leaving Nora at home with a quick kiss and a promise to explain later. By the time he arrived, the leak had already caused damage. Their competitor had used the information to undercut their offer, and the deal that had taken months to build was now falling apart. In the conference room, tension was high. Executives whispered among themselves, exchanging glances that Ethan didn't like. What? He asked, looking around the table. Say it. One of the senior executives, a man named Harold who had been with the company for over 20 years, finally spoke. Ethan, I don't want to make assumptions, but the timing, it's hard not to notice. This deal leaked 4 days after your wedding. Your wife is new to all of this. New people, new access. Stop. Ethan's voice was sharp enough that the room went quiet. Nora has nothing to do with this company. She's never seen any documents, never been near this office, never even asked about my work. I'm just saying what people are already saying, Harold said carefully. The press is already connecting it. We need to be ready for that. Ethan didn't respond right away. He walked to the window, staring out at the city skyline, trying to keep his anger in check. That night, after everyone had gone home, Ethan stayed late, going through old files on his computer, server logs, access records, anything that might show how the leak actually happened. What he found didn't make sense at first. The leaked information hadn't come from a recent file. It had been accessed weeks earlier, before the wedding, before Nora had even met him in Boston. Someone had copied the proposal long before any of this started. Ethan sat back in his chair, staring at the screen. If the leak started before Nora came into his life, then whoever did this wasn't trying to hurt his marriage. They had been planning something long before he ever walked into that diner. Ethan barely slept that night. By morning, he had already called Ryan and told him to clear his schedule. We're going to Chicago, he said. I want to talk to people who knew about this deal before it ever reached the table. Ryan didn't ask too many questions. He'd worked with Ethan long enough to know that when his voice sounded like that, something serious was happening. Before leaving, Ethan sat with Nora in their kitchen. She could tell something was wrong, even though he tried to keep his voice calm. There's a problem at work, he said. A leak. I need to go to Chicago for a few days to figure out where it came from. Is it bad? It's strange more than bad, Ethan admitted. I just need to understand it. Nora reached across the table and took his hand. Whatever it is, you'll figure it out. You always do. Ethan smiled, grateful for her steady presence, even though he could see the worry in her eyes too. He kissed her forehead before leaving, promising to call that evening. In Chicago, Ethan and Ryan met with several executives connected to the failed acquisition, people who had worked on early versions of the proposal months before it was finalized. The meetings were tense. Everyone seemed nervous, careful with their words, as if they were afraid of saying the wrong thing. We followed protocol, one executive insisted. Only senior staff had access to those files. Then how did they end up with our competitor? Ethan asked. Nobody had an answer. After the third meeting ended with the same result, Ryan pulled Ethan aside in the hallway. This isn't getting us anywhere. Everyone's giving the same rehearsed answers. Either they're all lying, or they genuinely don't know. I think it's the second one, Ethan said. Whoever did this was careful enough not to leave obvious tracks. That evening, while reviewing old emails on his laptop in the hotel room, Ethan came across something unexpected. A name he hadn't thought about in years. A reference to a woman named Emily Carter, someone he had been introduced to a couple of years earlier through a business contact. Her name appeared in an old thread connected to early planning meetings for the very deal that had just leaked. Ethan frowned. "Ryan, do you remember an Emily Carter?" Ryan thought for a moment. Wasn't she one of the introductions a few years back, before all this craziness started? Yeah. Why would her name be on early planning documents for this deal? The next morning, Ethan reached out to Emily directly. To his surprise, she agreed to meet without hesitation. They met at a quiet cafe near the Chicago River. Emily looked exactly as Ethan remembered. Calm, composed, and clearly someone who didn't waste time with small talk. "I heard about the leak," she said, before Ethan could even explain why he'd called. "And I'm guessing that's why you're here." "You knew about it before I told you?" "Word travels fast in certain circles," Emily said, "especially when people enjoy talking about your problems." Ethan leaned forward. "Your name came up in some old planning documents. I'm not accusing you of anything. I just need to understand the connection."
Emily nodded slowly, as if she had been expecting this conversation for a while. "I worked briefly with one of the consulting groups your company used a few years ago. After our introduction didn't go anywhere, I stayed in touch with a few people from that circle, mostly out of habit."
"What circle?"
"The matchmaking consultants. The same people who arranged most of your introductions over the years." Emily paused. "Ethan, has it ever occurred to you that the same small group of people arranged almost every single introduction you've had? 500 women, and most of them came through no more than a handful of advisors and consultants." Ethan sat back, surprised. He'd never really thought about it that way. To him, those introductions had always felt like background noise, a constant stream of names and faces that blurred together over the years.
"That's actually true,"
he admitted.
"I never noticed."
"Most people wouldn't," Emily said, "but I did, because I was on the other side of it. After my introduction with you didn't lead anywhere, I started paying attention. These advisors stayed close to each other. They shared information. Some of them even stayed in touch with the women they introduced you to, long after those meetings ended."
"Why would they do that?"
Emily shrugged. "Networking, probably. Business circles like that thrive on connections. But it does mean there's a fairly large group of people, former candidates, consultants, advisors, who've stayed loosely connected for years. All of them have some history with you, even if it's just one dinner that went nowhere." Ethan rubbed his temples.
"So somewhere in that group, there could be someone who had access to information about my company?"
"Possibly," Emily said. "Some of those women have brothers, fathers, or husbands in business. Information moves in strange ways." That night, Ethan called Nora to update her, keeping things simple so she wouldn't worry too much.
"I might have found something,"
he said.
"It's complicated, but there's a whole group of people connected to my past introductions. Some of them might have ties to what happened with the leak."
"That sounds like a lot of people to look into," Nora said.
"It is, but at least now I know where to start looking."
After the call ended, Ethan stared at the notes he'd written down. Names Emily had mentioned, consultants, old advisors, women he barely remembered meeting. One name on the list caught his eye, written in Emily's neat handwriting during their conversation. Victoria Hayes. Ethan paused, staring at it. Victoria had been the most recent name on his long list of rejections, the one that had made headlines just days before he met Nora. He hadn't thought about her since that night. But now, looking at her name connected to the same circle Emily had just described, Ethan felt something shift in his chest. A small, uncomfortable feeling he couldn't quite explain yet. He folded the paper and set it aside, telling himself it was probably nothing. But deep down, he wasn't so sure. From Chicago, Ethan and Ryan flew to Dallas, where a large portion of the company's older records were stored. If something had been happening for years, as Emily suggested, the answers wouldn't be in recent files. They'd be buried in old ones. The records room was exactly what Ethan expected. Rows of cabinets, boxes of files going back over a decade, and a small office where 2 analysts worked through digital archives. Ryan brought in 2 more people from the Dallas branch to help speed things up.
"We're not just looking for the leak anymore,"
Ethan told them.
"We're looking for patterns. Anything that connects failed deals, broken partnerships, or lost opportunities over the past several years."
It took 2 full days of going through files before anything started to make sense.
One of the analysts, a quiet woman named Priya, found the first thread. "Sir, I think you need to see this." She pulled up a spreadsheet showing a timeline of major company setbacks over the past 8 years. Failed mergers, partnerships that fell apart at the last minute, deals that mysteriously went to competitors. On the surface, they looked unrelated. Different departments, different cities, different teams involved each time. But one name appeared in the approval chain of almost every single one. Caleb Parker. Ethan stared at the screen. "Caleb's been with the company for 15 years. He's one of my most trusted advisors. He helped me close half the deals that actually worked." "I'm not saying he caused any of this," Priya said carefully. "But he's connected to all of it. Every failed deal on this list passed through his office at some point, even if just for a signature or a review." Ryan frowned, leaning over the screen. "That's a lot of coincidences." They flew to Atlanta the next day, where another set of older records were kept, hoping to find more context. The pattern only got stronger. Project after project, Caleb's name kept appearing, sometimes as a small footnote, sometimes as someone who had simply reviewed a document before it disappeared or changed. By the end of the second day, Ryan looked exhausted. "Ethan, I don't want to say it, but the evidence is right there. We need to talk to Caleb." Ethan didn't respond right away. He thought about all the years Caleb had spent by his side, late nights working through contracts, advice given over quiet dinners, the way Caleb had been one of the few people who never seemed impressed by Ethan's money or name. "I know what the files say," Ethan said finally, "but something about this doesn't feel right. Caleb's never asked for more responsibility, more credit, anything. If he was behind all this, what would he even be getting out of it?" "Maybe it's not about getting something," Ryan said quietly. "Maybe it's about someone else." Back in Boston, Nora wasn't just sitting around waiting for updates. After Ethan mentioned Victoria's name during one of their calls, something about it stuck with her. She reached out to Emily, whose number Ethan had given her after the meeting in Chicago, and the 2 women ended up talking for hours. "I keep thinking about something," Nora said. "Ethan said Victoria's name came up in that circle of old introductions, but she was also the last person he rejected before he met me. That feels like more than just a coincidence." "It might be nothing," Emily said, "but it wouldn't hurt to look a little closer." The 2 women started piecing together a rough timeline of their own, not of business deals, but of moments in Ethan's personal life, major turning points, big decisions, times when something significant had happened, good or bad. What they found was strange. Victoria's name kept appearing near almost every one of those moments, not directly, but close enough to notice once you started looking. She had attended the same charity event where Ethan first announced he was taking over the company from his father years ago. She had been present at a business dinner the same week a major partnership fell apart. She had even been photographed at the same hotel, on the same weekend, as one of Ethan's earlier rejected introductions, months before that introduction ever happened. "It's like she's just always around," Nora said, staring at the timeline they'd put together on Emily's laptop. "But none of this proves anything. People go to the same events all the time. Rich circles overlap constantly." "That's true," Emily agreed. "There's nothing illegal about being in the same room as someone. No documents with her name on them, no money trails, nothing official." "Then maybe it really is just a coincidence." Emily was quiet for a moment, looking at the screen. "Maybe, but coincidences usually don't follow someone around for 10 years. Nora sat back, feeling a strange chill she couldn't quite explain. She thought about the night Ethan had told her about his rejection of Victoria, The headlines, the laughter, the way the whole city had treated it like a joke. What if that night hadn't been a coincidence either? She didn't say it out loud, not yet. It felt too big, too uncertain, like something she might be imagining just because she was looking too hard. But that evening, when Ethan called from Atlanta, sounding tired and confused about Caleb, Nora found herself hesitating before mentioning anything about Victoria. "Find anything on your end?" Ethan asked. "Maybe," Nora said slowly, "but I think we need to talk about it in person. It might be nothing, but it also might not be." Ethan flew back to Boston the next morning, cutting the Atlanta trip short. He wanted to see Nora in person before deciding anything about Caleb. He found her at the diner, sitting in a corner booth with Emily, papers spread across the table between them. The diner was closed for the afternoon, the chairs still stacked from cleaning. "You said you found something," Ethan said, sliding into the booth across from them. Nora slid the timeline toward him. "It's not proof of anything, but look at this." Ethan studied the pages slowly. Dates, events, locations, all things he recognized from his own life, his own history. And next to almost every one, a small note in Nora's handwriting. Victoria Hayes, present. "She was at all of these?" Ethan asked, his voice quieter than before. "Not all of them," Emily said, "but enough that it's hard to ignore. And remember, Ethan, she was the last rejection before you met Nora. The timing of everything since then, it just feels too perfect." Ethan sat back, rubbing his face with both hands. "This is a lot to take in. First Caleb, now this." "Speaking of Caleb," Ryan said, walking in from the back. He'd flown in separately and joined them at the diner. "I think we need to make a decision soon. The board's already asking questions. If word gets out that someone this close to you might be involved in years of sabotage, and we did nothing." "I know," Ethan said sharply. "I know, Ryan, but something about all of this still doesn't sit right." "The evidence points to him," Ryan said. "Every failed deal, every leak, his name is right there." "That's exactly what bothers me," Nora said quietly. Everyone looked at her. "Think about it," she continued. "If someone wanted to hide what they were really doing, what's the easiest way to do that? Make sure all the evidence points somewhere else, somewhere believable. Caleb's been close to Ethan for 15 years. He'd have access to everything. He's the perfect person to blame because on paper, it makes sense." "You're saying he's being framed," Emily said slowly. "Maybe. I don't know for sure. But Ethan, you said it yourself. What would Caleb even gain from any of this? He's never asked for more money, more power, more recognition. People who do things like this usually want something. What does he want?" Ethan was quiet for a long moment. Then he stood up. "I need to talk to him, in person." They flew to Seattle, where Caleb had been overseeing a smaller branch office for the past few months. A posting Ethan now realized had quietly removed Caleb from the center of company operations right around the time most of the suspicious activity had started. Caleb looked surprised to see Ethan walk into his office unannounced, Ryan and Nora following behind him. "Ethan, what's going on?" "We need to talk," Ethan said, "about a lot of things." Over the next 2 hours, Ethan laid out everything. The leak, the timeline of failed deals, Caleb's name appearing across years of records. He watched Caleb's face carefully the entire time, looking for any sign of guilt, deception, anything. What he saw instead was confusion, then hurt.
"You think I did all this?" Caleb asked, his voice quiet.
"The evidence says you were involved," Ryan said carefully.
"The evidence is wrong," Caleb said. He walked to his desk and pulled out a folder, dropping it in front of them. "These are my personal notes from those years. Look at the dates." Nora picked up the folder and started going through it. After a few minutes, she looked up.
"Ethan, 3 of these failed deals, the ones where Caleb's name is in the approval chain,
He actually lost money on them, personally. Bonuses tied to these projects, investments he'd made based on them moving forward. If he sabotaged these deals, he sabotaged himself too. Ethan took the folder, reading through it himself. Nora was right. The numbers didn't lie. Caleb had been financially hurt by several of the very projects he was supposedly sabotaging. "Why would you do that to yourself?" Ryan asked, confused. "I wouldn't," Caleb said. "I didn't. Someone's been setting things up so it looks like I'm involved, but I never noticed because I never lost anything that mattered to me personally, except money, which I never cared about that much anyway." The room went quiet. "This is starting to sound familiar," Nora said slowly, looking at Ethan. "Someone made it look like Caleb was behind everything, even though it actually hurt him. And after our wedding, the timing made it look like I might be behind the leak, even though I'd never even seen those documents." Ethan's eyes widened slightly as the pieces started clicking together. Someone's been doing this for years, pointing fingers at people who had nothing to gain, so no one would look at who actually benefits. "Then who benefits?" Caleb asked. "From any of this?" Nobody answered right away, but Ethan already had a name in his mind, the same name that had been quietly appearing in the background of his life for the past 10 years, present at every turning point, every failure, every rejection. "I think," Ethan said slowly, "we've been looking at the wrong people this whole time." He looked at Nora. "We need to find out everything we can about Victoria Hayes. Everything. Starting from the beginning." Before they could focus fully on Victoria, something else demanded their attention. While going through Caleb's personal records to clear his name with the board, Ryan found a sealed envelope tucked at the back of an old filing cabinet in the Seattle office. It was addressed to Caleb, postmarked from Nashville, dated almost 10 years earlier. The return address belonged to a name none of them recognized, a man named Walter Pierce. "This was just sitting here?" Ethan asked, holding the envelope. "Looks like it's been here a long time," Ryan said. "Caleb, do you know who this is?" Caleb's face changed the moment he saw the envelope. He went pale, then quickly tried to hide it. "It's nothing. Old business contact." But his hands were shaking slightly as he reached for it. Ethan noticed. "Caleb, after everything that's happened, I think we're past hiding things from each other." For a long moment, Caleb said nothing. Then he sat down heavily in his chair, staring at the envelope like it weighed far more than paper should. "Walter Pierce was my mother's doctor," Caleb said quietly. "A long time ago, before I was born." "Okay," Ethan said slowly, not understanding yet. "He's also the man who delivered you, Ethan, right here in this city, before your family moved to New York." The room went still. "I don't understand," Ethan said. "What does that have to do with anything?" Caleb opened the envelope, his hands still shaking, and pulled out an old letter along with a folded document. He hesitated before handing it to Ethan. "I found this 10 years ago," Caleb said, "after my mother passed away. It was in her things." Ethan unfolded the document carefully. It took him a moment to understand what he was looking at. Old medical records, names, dates, his father's name, his mother's name, and another name listed alongside them. A woman Ethan had never heard of. Caleb's mother. Ethan looked up slowly. "Caleb, is this saying, 'Your father and my mother knew each other before he married your mom,'" Caleb said, his voice steady but quiet. "I was born about a year before you were. Same father, different mothers." Nobody spoke. Even Ryan, who rarely showed much emotion, looked stunned. "You're my brother," Ethan said, the words feeling strange in his mouth. "Half-brother," Caleb corrected gently. "I found out 10 years ago, right before I joined your company. I wasn't even looking for a job with you on purpose. An old family friend suggested it, said it would be a good opportunity. I didn't think much of it at the time, but once I started working closely with you and then found this letter explaining everything, I didn't know what to do." "Why didn't you say anything?" Ethan asked. His voice wasn't angry, just confused and a little hurt. "Because what was I supposed to say?" Caleb said. "Hey, by the way, your father had another family before yours, and I'm the result of it? Your father had passed away years before I found out. Telling you would have meant either accusing him of something while he wasn't around to explain himself, or making you feel like I was trying to claim something from your family. I didn't want either." "So you just stayed quiet for 10 years. "I told myself it didn't matter," Caleb said. "That I'd just work hard, prove I deserved to be here on my own, and never bring it up. But somewhere along the way, I think it started affecting me more than I realized. Every time something went wrong with the company, every time I felt overlooked for a promotion or a project, I'd think about this." He gestured at the letter. "About how I was technically part of this family too, but no one would ever know it. I never sabotaged anything, Ethan. But maybe I stopped paying attention the way I should have. Maybe I let things slip through because part of me was distracted by all of this, wondering if I even belonged here." Nora, who had been listening quietly, spoke up. "Caleb, did anyone else know about this? About the letter, or the connection between you and Ethan's father?" Caleb thought for a moment. "Just one person, actually. A few years ago, I was going through a hard time, drinking too much, struggling with all of this privately. I told someone about it, someone I trusted at the time." "Who?" Ethan asked. Caleb hesitated, then looked up, his expression suddenly uneasy, as if he were only now realizing something. "Victoria Hayes." The name hit the room like a weight dropping. "We were friends, briefly, years ago," Caleb continued, "before any of the rumors about her and Ethan started. I was vulnerable, and she was a good listener. I told her about the letter, about feeling like an outsider in my own family without anyone knowing it. She seemed understanding, supportive even." Ethan's jaw tightened. "And after that conversation, is that around when things started going wrong with the company?" Caleb's eyes widened slightly as he thought back. I think so. Not immediately, but not long after." Ryan exhaled slowly. So Victoria knew about Caleb's connection to Ethan's family. She knew he felt overlooked, distracted, maybe even a little resentful without realizing it. And somehow, after that, things started falling apart, in ways that made Caleb look responsible, even though he wasn't actually behind any of it. "She didn't make me do anything," Caleb said quickly. "I never sabotaged anything on purpose." "No," Nora said slowly, putting the pieces together in her mind. "But maybe she didn't need you to. Maybe all she needed was for you to feel exactly the way you did. Distracted, hurt, a little disconnected, so that when things went wrong around you, it would be easy for everyone else to assume you were involved." The room fell silent again. Ethan looked at the letter in his hands, proof of a family secret that had been hidden for decades, used quietly by someone else for reasons that were only now starting to make sense. "If Victoria knew about this," Ethan said finally, "then she's been planning something far longer than any of us realized, and we still don't fully understand why." He folded the letter carefully and looked around at the people in the room, his brother, his wife, his closest advisor. "It's time we find out exactly what Victoria Hayes has been building, and why all of this somehow always leads back to her." A week later, Ethan called a meeting in Miami. He told everyone it was a quiet location, far from the usual offices in New York, somewhere they could think clearly without distractions or leaks reaching the wrong people. Nora, Emily, Caleb, and Ryan all gathered at a private house Ethan had rented near the water. For 2 days, they worked through everything they had found, trying to understand the full picture before deciding what to do next. Emily had spent the past week reaching out to old contacts, former heiresses, advisors, consultants she hadn't spoken to in years. She approached each conversation carefully, never mentioning Victoria directly at first, just asking about old times, old introductions, people they used to know. What she found was bigger than any of them expected. "It's not just a few people," Emily said, spreading out notes across the dining table. "Victoria has stayed in contact with almost everyone from that circle. Former candidates Ethan rejected, consultants who used to arrange introductions, even some of the families involved in deals that fell apart over the years." "That's a lot of people to stay friendly with," Ryan said. "That's the thing. She wasn't just friendly. She helped people, quietly. A consultant who lost a major client a few years back, Victoria introduced them to someone new. A former candidate who felt embarrassed after being rejected by Ethan, Victoria was there for her, gave her advice, helped her get into a new social circle entirely." "She built relationships," Nora said slowly, "with everyone who had a reason to feel hurt or overlooked because of Ethan." "Exactly," Emily said. "And here's the part that really stood out to me. None of these people ever did anything obviously wrong. A consultant mentioning a small detail in passing, a former candidate happening to know someone who knew someone. None of it looks like sabotage on its own. But put it all together over 10 years and you get exactly what happened to us," Caleb finished quietly. "Information moving in small pieces through people who didn't even realize they were part of something bigger." Ethan had been quiet for most of the conversation, staring out at the water. "Why, though? What does she actually get out of any of this? My father's name? My company? She's already wealthy. Her family already has influence." "Maybe it's not about money," Nora said. "Maybe it's about something else." Emily nodded slowly. "I actually found something that might explain it. A few years ago, before any of the rejections that made headlines, Victoria's father was in talks to merge his shipping business with your father's company, Ethan. It was supposed to be one of the biggest partnerships in the industry at the time." "I remember hearing something about that," Ethan said. "It fell apart before I took over the company. I never knew the details." "It fell apart because your father backed out at the last minute," Emily said. "No real explanation given, just walked away from the deal. Victoria's father lost a lot, not just money, but reputation. People said he'd been outmaneuvered, embarrassed publicly." "And Victoria was how old at the time?" Nora asked. 16, Emily said. "Old enough to understand what was happening. Old enough to remember how people treated her family afterward." The room was quiet for a moment.
"So all of this," Ryan said slowly, "every introduction, every rejection, every failed deal over the years, it traces back to one business deal that fell apart before Ethan even ran the company." "I think so," Emily said. "I think Victoria spent years building a position where she'd have influence over the people closest to Ethan, close enough to slowly affect his business, his relationships, everything, without ever being directly connected to any of it herself." "But why marry him then?" Nora asked. "If her goal was just to have influence around him, why try so hard to actually become his wife?" Emily hesitated. "Honestly, I don't think marrying Ethan was ever really the goal. I think being rejected publicly, again, was." Everyone looked at her, confused. "Think about it," Emily continued. "Victoria didn't need to marry Ethan to have influence. She already had it, through everyone around him. But being the 500th rejection, very publicly, gave her something else. Sympathy. A reason for people to talk about her, to feel sorry for her,
to trust her even more. After that night, more doors opened for her than ever before. People felt bad for her. They confided in her. They wanted to help her. She used the rejection, Ethan said slowly, realization dawning on his face. She used it to get even closer to everyone. And it worked, Emily said. Right after that rejection, things moved faster than ever. The leak happened within days of your wedding. Suspicion fell on Nora, then Caleb, almost perfectly timed. Caleb shook his head slowly. All this time, I thought I was just unlucky, distracted, maybe a little paranoid. But it wasn't me at all. It was never about any one person, Nora said quietly. Not really. It was about building something slowly, using people's emotions, embarrassment, sympathy, feeling overlooked, without anyone noticing they were being used at all. Ethan stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the water for a long moment. 10 years, he said finally. 10 years of rejections, deals, relationships, and somewhere in the middle of all of it, one person was quietly building something out of every piece I left behind, without even realizing it. He turned back to face everyone in the room. It's time to end it, all of it. But we need to do this carefully. If Victoria realizes we know everything before we're ready, she'll have time to disappear into all those relationships she's built and start over somewhere else. So, what's the plan? Ryan asked. Ethan thought for a moment, then looked at Nora. We bring everyone together, Victoria included. Somewhere she won't expect, with everyone she's quietly used standing in the same room. He paused. Bar Harbor. My family has a property there. It's quiet, private, and far enough from everything that no one will think twice about an invitation. He looked around the room one last time. Let's give Victoria exactly what she spent 10 years avoiding. A room full of people comparing notes all at once. The house in Bar Harbor sat on a quiet stretch of coastline, surrounded by tall pines and the sound of waves hitting the rocks below. Ethan had chosen it for exactly that reason. Peaceful, private, the kind of place where people let their guard down. The invitations went out carefully, worded as a small gathering to celebrate Ethan and Nora's marriage properly, away from the noise of the city. Caleb, Emily, Ryan, a few key executives whose names had come up in old records. And, of course, Victoria. She arrived on the second day, dressed elegantly, greeting everyone with the same warm smile she always wore. If she felt any nervousness about being there, she hid it well. Ethan, she said, taking his hand. Thank you for the invitation. I wasn't sure I'd be welcome after everything. We're past that, Ethan said evenly. Come in. Everyone's waiting. The main room overlooked the water, with a long table set for dinner. Caleb and Emily were already seated, talking quietly. Ryan stood near the window, watching the door. Nora sat near the head of the table, calm but alert. Dinner began normally enough. Polite conversation, comments about the view, the food. Victoria seemed at ease, chatting with Emily about old times, asking Caleb how things were going at the Seattle office. It was Ethan who finally shifted the conversation. Victoria, he said, setting down his glass. I wanted everyone here tonight because we've all recently been talking about the past few months, but also about the past several years. Victoria's smile didn't waver. Oh, that sounds serious. It is, Ethan said. We've been putting some things together. Old introductions, old consultants. A business deal between our families that fell apart a long time ago. For just a moment, barely noticeable, Victoria's expression flickered. I'm not sure I follow, she said lightly. Let me help, Emily said, pulling out a folder and sliding it toward the center of the table. Over the past week, I spoke with 12 different people, former candidates, consultants, a few business contacts whose deals fell apart over the years. Every single one of them mentioned you, Victoria. Not as someone they suspected, as someone who helped them, comforted them, gave them advice after things went wrong. "I've stayed close with a lot of people," Victoria said smoothly. "That's hardly unusual." "No, it's not," Caleb said. "Except every person Emily talked to had one thing in common. They were all hurt, in some way, by something connected to Ethan. A rejection, a failed deal, a missed opportunity. And in every case, you were one of the first people there afterward." "You're describing kindness like it's a crime," Victoria said, her voice still calm, though something underneath it had shifted. "It's not a crime," Nora said quietly. "Not on its own. But Victoria, 10 years ago, your father's merger with Ethan's father fell apart. Right before it happened. No real reason given. Just walked away." The room went still. Victoria's smile finally faded, just slightly. "You were 16, Nora continued. Old enough to watch your family go through something painful and humiliating without ever fully understanding why. And somewhere along the way, you decided to make sure something like that never happened to you again, by making sure you always had control over the people closest to it happening." "This is quite a story," Victoria said, her voice cooler now. "But stories aren't evidence." "You're right," Ethan said. "There's no single document, no signed confession, just 10 years of patterns that all happen to lead back to the same person every time. The leak after our wedding, the suspicion that fell on Nora, the records pointing toward Caleb. All of it traced back to people you'd quietly built relationships with, people who never even realized they were helping you." "And the rejection," Emily added. "Your rejection on national television. It wasn't an accident, was it? You knew exactly how it would look. Sympathy, attention, doors opening that wouldn't have opened otherwise." For a long moment, Victoria said nothing. The warmth in her expression slowly drained away, replaced by something colder, more tired. "You have no idea what it felt like," she finally said, her voice quiet but sharp. "Watching my father lose everything because of one decision your father made without any explanation. Watching people who used to respect him suddenly look away when he walked into a room. I was 16, and I understood, even then, that the only way to never feel that small again was to make sure I was always the one people needed." "So you spent 10 years building a web of people who owed you something," Ryan said. "All so you'd never feel powerless again." "It worked," Victoria said simply. "For 10 years, it worked perfectly." "Until it didn't," Nora said gently. "Because somewhere in all of it, you didn't account for one thing." Victoria looked at her, waiting. "You didn't expect Ethan to actually find something real," Nora said. "Something that had nothing to do with money or status or any of the things you spent years manipulating. You expected him to keep making the same mistakes over and over so you could keep using them. But he didn't." The room was silent. Victoria looked around the table, at Caleb, who no longer looked confused or hurt, just steady. At Emily, who had once been just another name on a list, now sitting calmly with proof in front of her. At Ryan, who had spent weeks untangling everything she'd built. At Ethan, who wasn't angry anymore, just quiet. And at Nora, the woman whose simple, unremarkable life had accidentally exposed everything. "I suppose there's nothing left to say," Victoria said, finally. "There isn't," Ethan agreed. "Everyone at this table now knows exactly what happened and why. That's enough. We're not interested in destroying anything else, including you. But it ends here. Whatever influence you built, whatever connections you've used, it's done." Victoria didn't argue. She simply nodded, stood, and walked out without another word, leaving the room quieter than it had been all evening. In the weeks that followed, things slowly settled. Caleb left the company to build something of his own, smaller, quieter, away from the shadow of a family name he'd spent years hiding from. Ethan made sure he left with everything he was owed, and more. Emily became one of Nora's closest friends. The two of them often found together at the diner, laughing over coffee like they'd known each other for years. Ethan restructured parts of the company, making sure no single person, advisor, consultant, or otherwise, could quietly accumulate that much influence again. And on a quiet evening, months later, Ethan and Nora stood together on the coastline near Bar Harbor, watching the waves roll in. "Do you ever think about how it all started?" Nora asked. "One rejection, one dinner." "All the time," Ethan said, wrapping an arm around her. "For 10 years, I thought my life was just a series of failed introductions and bad luck. Turns out, it was all connected the whole time. I just never looked closely enough." Nora leaned against him, watching the water. "And now?" "Now," Ethan said quietly, "I think our marriage didn't cause any of this. It just finally brought it into the light." They stood there a while longer, the sound of the waves filling the silence between them. Not the end of something, but the quiet after it.